Hello, and welcome to this special Halloween edition of Olmsted Overheard, the place for real conversations about what's happening in and around Olmsted Falls, Ohio. I'm your host, Mark McCausland. It's been a little while since the last episode, and I want to start by saying thanks for waiting for what's coming next. Between work travel and a few other commitments, I've unintentionally had to take a short break, but I'm back and excited to share what's next. This episode also marks a kind of soft relaunch for Olmsted Overheard. There's a new logo, a new Facebook page, and even a dedicated YouTube channel, all part of making the podcast easier to find, follow, and share, and hopefully to build a stronger space for these conversations about our community. I've got a lot coming your way soon, with much shorter waits between episodes, at least for the near future. In addition to today's seasonal story, I will be releasing new interviews, including conversations with a candidate for school board and a candidate for Olmsted Falls Council at large. I'm also working on an Olmsted election special featuring short recordings from as many local candidates as are willing to participate. This is hopefully going to be a one-stop place for you to hear directly from the people running for office. And I'm also going to do an episode that dives into why our local elections are officially and legally supposed to be nonpartisan, and why I think that's something worth understanding and protecting. But today, we're stepping away from City Hall and stepping into one of the oldest and strangest stories ever told in Olmsted Falls to explore something a little more mysterious. Every town has its own legends, the stories that get whispered about on late autumn nights. Here in Olmsted Falls, few tales have endured quite like the legend of Witch's Hill. So, turn down the lights, settle in, and let's take a closer look at one of the oldest and eeriest stories from right here in our own backyard. This is the Halloween special of Olmsted Overheard. At the edge of town, off of Lewis Road, is the old Chestnut Grove Cemetery. Not the new Chestnut Grove Cemetery, the large one by the train tracks that you can't help but notice and drive by. No, the old Chestnut Grove Cemetery is nestled off to the side where Lewis Road does one of its almost 90-degree turns. If you aren't looking, you might not even notice it. Inside Old Chestnut Grove, close to the edge where the land soon dips sharply into the curve of the Rocky River, is a spot that doesn't have a name on any map. A small rise in the land, a couple of trees separate from the others, and if you look closely, some moss-covered stone blocks. For generations, the locals of Olmsted Falls have given this spot its own name, Witch's Hill. Ask around long enough and you'll hear the stories. Some will say a witch was buried there after being executed in the 1800s. Some claim her restless spirit still roams the hill at night. They say she's still waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to stand where she fell. When they buried her, directly underneath the tree that they hung her from, they also built a fence of iron around the grave, 13 posts, each tipped with a sharp spike, to keep her spirit in, or maybe to keep the rest of us out. If you stand there long enough, they say you'll hear it, the sound of metal trembling under the ground. Some say it's the fence still shifting in its sleep. Others say it's her, trying to wake. You can laugh if you want, you can call it superstition, but the people of Olmsted Falls have been telling this story for more than 100 years, at least. And the hill, and the tree, and evidence of the fence was all still there. But here's the question that's lingered longer than the legend itself. Is there any truth behind it? Or is this just another ghost story born from shadows, half-remembered history, and the thrill of a dare after dark? In tonight's episode, we'll explore how a simple patch of land became one of the most enduring pieces of folklore here in Olmsted Falls. We'll trace its roots, separate the rumor from the record, because somewhere between the truth and the telling is the legend of Witch's Hill. The story goes like this. Long ago, no one seems sure exactly when, a woman in Olmsted Falls was accused of witchcraft. The story says she lived alone, a cabin deep in the woods, halfway between the river and the road. She kept to herself most of the time, but if a baby was sick or if a crop failed, someone always went knocking at her door. And that might have been her first mistake, because when the medicine worked, people said she was blessed. When it didn't, they said she was cursed. And in the year the fever came, when whole families fell ill, people started talking about the woman who walked the woods at night, about the black cat that followed her everywhere, about the eyes they thought they saw in her window, glowing red. Legend has it that a mob formed one night, people with lanterns, clutching crosses, and they found her cabin empty, but the fire still burning. Her footsteps led toward what is now known as the Chestnut Grove Cemetery. There, beneath an old tree, she was hanged. To keep her from returning, they buried her at the base of that very tree, surrounded by 13 small boxes. Some say of ashes, others say of stones. Then they built a fence of iron around the grave, 13 posts, 13 spikes, sealing her spirit inside. A prison of iron to hold what they couldn't kill. They buried her, supposedly with stones pressed over her eyes, and sealed the earth with salt. When it was done, no one spoke her name again. But the hill never quite settled. The ground would sink just a little, as if something below was breathing. Generations passed. The cemetery grew around it. New graves appeared, new trees rose. But that patch of ground stayed bare. No grass, no flowers, just soil and shadow. And eventually came the dares. Those who dared to visit after dark said they could feel the air change near that fence. The temperature dropped. Their flashlights dimmed. Some swore they heard a woman whisper their names. Some left coins, candles, or carvings in the bark. A few said they saw glowing eyes watching from the woods. And the fence became the heart of the story. Teenagers would sneak out after midnight bringing flashlights and bravado. They would dare each other to touch the spikes or to spend the night on the hill. And the rumors go, if you tapped the fence 13 times, the witch would answer. Clang! The whole thing would shake. No one ever stayed to see what happened next. They'd run, every time. And by morning, they'd swear it was just the wind. The legend spread past in whispers at bonfires and whispered again in classrooms. Every retelling added something new. A black cat with red eyes. A thunderstorm that struck her grave each Halloween. A rumor that no grass would grow inside the iron fence. Even people who didn't believe it completely, who rolled their eyes at the ghost stories, they still knew the name. Witch's Hill. Almost everyone at some point had gone there just to see. But one year, the fence was gone. Removed by the caretaker of the cemetery. Too many trespassers, too many broken stones, too many people trying to wake what should have been left asleep. Although I assure you this has not stopped people from still making a pilgrimage to Witch's Hill to see for themselves. When I first heard about this, it made me wonder, how many ghost stories just start this way? Simple fence, patch of ground that feels different, and a community eager to explain why. So let's leave the whispers behind for a moment and look at what we actually know about Witch's Hill. The records, the maps, the people who've washed over it. When you go looking for proof of a witch in Olmsted Falls, the first thing you discover is how little proof there is of anything. The Olmsted Township meeting minutes, which survive from the 1830s and 40s, list things like taxes, property transfers, and road repairs, but nothing about witchcraft, accusations, or any criminal proceedings of that kind. No execution records, no burial permits for unnamed women. Also, no mention in the Cuyahoga County probate logs, which track deaths and estates going back to 1811. There's also no record in the Northern Ohio Historical Society archives or in the Olmsted Historical Society's own collection at Frostville Museum. Their newsletters, including the long-running Olmsted 200 series, have covered Witches Hill in some level of detail, though. Issue 101, published October 1st, 2021, devotes several pages to it. That article quotes longtime cemetery superintendent Dan Hill, who quite flatly said, "There's no witch buried there. It's a cute little story." But that same issue notes the remnants that helped the rumor grow. The square stone posts, the removed iron fence, the shallow depression in the earth. Those are real. They can still be seen today. For good measure, you can search digital archives like newspapers.com, Chronicling America, which index the Cleveland Plain Dealer and other publications from this area through the late 19th century. But typing in witch and Olmsted Falls brings nothing, not even a passing mention. In contrast, Salem's witch stories flood those same databases with hundreds of entries from historical records. So the silence here is meaningful. And yet, some of that silence may come down to the way small-town history works. Not everything was written down. Not every rumor reached a court docket or a newspaper page. Some versions of this particular story even try to fill that silence with smoke, literally. People say that there was an old courthouse that burned down, taking the records of all of this with it. Others blame a church fire that erased the same sort of records from the church's burial log. But the county archives still exist from that time period. Church books for local churches do still exist. And so the fires are most likely part of the legend, not the ledger. So with no hard record of any of this particular story lived by word of mouth. In porches and pews and eventually online message boards. And that's where Witches Hill thrived. In fact, the earliest printed references to it appear not in 1800s era documents, but in 1900s folklore collections and ghost tours. By the 1990s, it was listed on websites like Panicked.com and the Ohio Exploration Society, describing it as an alleged witch's grave behind Chestnut Grove Cemetery. These entries cite no primary sources, only local hearsay. They're evidence, yes, but of belief, not of actual recorded events. So the record stands empty. The Witch of Olmsted Falls never appears in law, faith records, or journalism, only in conversation. That gap, though, between documentation and imagination is where folklore breathes. And maybe that's why the story feels so powerful, because every time someone fails to find the witch's name, it leaves a little more space for mystery. And there you have it, the story and the records that do or don't exist to support it. But despite the lack of real evidence, I won't deny the excitement I found in following this particular trail, because, in this case, the trail leads not to magic, but to a real place. Old Chestnut Grove Cemetery, right here in Olmsted Falls, just off of Lewis Road. There's still a little hill. There's still a tree. You can still feel the dip in the earth where the grave might have been. And there really was a fence, and you can still see very clearly the evidence of that. Today, only the stone bases of the fence remain, a line of square shadows marking the place. But you can still easily see them. Square stones, evenly spaced, surrounding the tree. And in those stones, you can still very clearly see what is left of those old iron fence posts. each with a short metal spike that once held the iron rail. No one's sure when it was built or by whom, but these marks remain. And surprisingly enough to me, I went there just a few days ago, people still leave trinkets, tokens, offerings maybe, at Witch's Hill. There were several tokens left. There were stones placed very intently. There was jewelry, some wrapped around the old iron spikes. There were even a few candles there from, a ritual. And near the base of the tree, half covered in leaves, was a round wooden disc, about 6 inches across, with raised lines meeting at the center like some sort of Trinity mark. Clearly a symbol made with purpose and deliberately placed squarely where the alleged witch's grave would have been. It is worth noting I could pick it up very easily. It was quite light, but I was not about to remove it. What exactly this symbol means, I don't know. Protection, remembrance, or something else. Whatever the intent of any of these objects left here was, none of these trinkets were old. It is clear that this legend still lives quite strongly here in Olmsted Falls. Again, if you go there now, you can see it. The pattern of the stones and this empty square that started a century of whispers. Beyond that, though, and the trinkets that people leave, there's nothing waiting for you there. No curse, no spirit. At least I hope not, since I went there. Although I did take a couple of pictures while I was there, and one of them has one of those weird light blurs or swooshes that people on the internet always say are spirits. So, who knows? Maybe there is truth to all the legend. It's existed long enough. Maybe you'll have to go and find out for yourself. It certainly is a legend that's still alive. This has been The Legend of Witch's Hill, a story from right here in Olmsted Falls. Thank you for listening to this special Halloween episode of Olmsted Overheard. I hope you enjoyed this look at one of our town's oldest and most mysterious stories, and maybe learned something new about the legends that live right here in Olmsted Falls. And listen up, I would love to hear your stories about Witch's Hill. If you want to share, head over to fanlist.com/Olmsted Overheard. That's fanlist, FANLIST.com/Olmsted Overheard, all one word. The link is in the episode description too. I'll pick one or two of my favorite submissions and include them in the intro to my next episode. And now, we'll wrap things up. As I mentioned at the start, this podcast is in the middle of a soft relaunch. You can now find the show's new logo, dedicated Facebook page, and YouTube channel. So if you haven't already, follow or subscribe wherever you listen and help spread the word. And there's much more coming soon. Interviews with a candidate for school board, a candidate for council at large, an Olmsted election special featuring the voices from across this year's ballot, and a discussion about why our local elections are officially nonpartisan and why that matters. I'm Mark McCausland. Happy Halloween, and this has been Olmsted Overheard.